Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We're very excited to have our alumni panel for tonight, adding another student. I'm going to get started just by going through the bios for each of our panelists. And for each panelist, I ask that you just say hello after I've read your bio so that everyone can kind of put a face with the bio. Going too fast. So Margaret Mcbride is an MA and a fourth-year doctoral candidate from Saginaw, Michigan, studying developmental psychology at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She received her BA in biopsychology, cognition, and neuroscience with a minor in community action and social change from the University of Michigan. Her research investigates how the neighborhood context, such as community violence, neighborhood support, gentrification, influence health outcomes and development for Black youth and families. Several organizations have funded her scholarship, including the National Science Foundation, Ford Foundation, UNC Violence and Injury Prevention Center, and the Carolina Center for Public Service. Margaret seeks to engage participatory and community action approaches in her work, leading her to internships with Detroit Initiative, Tallynet, Prison Creative Arts Project, and Cities United. In her free time, Margaret enjoys volunteering at community programs, creating Black youth. Oh shoot, I can't see it. There we go. And stay tuned for Dear Dad, Love Nelson, coming out 2022 with Free Spirit Publishing. And can you just say hello?
Hello, everybody.
Thanks so much for being with us tonight. We also have Whitney Thuri. Whitney Thuri graduated from U of M in 2013 with a degree in psychology and CASC. I'm letting folks in as we go. And went on to complete an AmeriCorps service year in Baltimore. They attended Washington University in St. Louis, where they obtained a master's in social work and a master's in elementary education. Following grad school, they taught second grade in Philadelphia, but made the difficult decision to resign to better maintain their health and well-being. They are now back in Michigan and looking forward to re-entering early childhood education with a focus on family advocacy and engagement. Can you say hi, Whitney?
Hi.
So good to have you here tonight. We have Emily Hill. And Emily is a licensed clinical social worker, currently holding the roles as a therapist, educator, and consultant. Emily graduated from the University of Michigan in 2014 with a BA in psychology and a minor in CASC, and then graduated with their MSW in 2015 from the University of Michigan School of Social Work. Currently, Emily is the owner of her private psychotherapy and consulting practice, Rising Tide Wellness and Education, based out of Lansing, Michigan. They work to provide safe, compassionate, and affirming mental health care, sex therapy, and education in BIPOC and LGBTQ+ individuals using a decolonization framework. Emily is also passionate about providing consultation and education to therapists and organizations around decolonizing their practice. Their professional career has included school-based community mental health in Western Wayne County, HIV research through the University of Michigan School of Public Health, and the Center for Sexuality and Health Disparities, HIV clinical care and sexual education at Michigan Medicine, and private mental health practices. Can you say hi, Emily?
Hi, everyone.
Thanks so much for being here. Eliza Laramie graduated from University of Michigan in 2019 with a BBA and a CASC minor. After graduation, she moved to Chicago and worked for a consulting firm, McKinsey, where she focused on public and the social sector work to explore many areas of business and government. This past year, Eliza moved to Seattle and started a new job at Gates Ventures, Bill Gates' private office, focused on women's health strategy work. She continues to explore the intersection of business and social impact in her career path to find the right area of work and impact for her. Can you say hi, Eliza?
Hi, everyone.
Thanks so much for being here tonight. And we have Brinley Bruton, is a recruiter in the mission-driven startup world. She graduated in 2015 from Michigan with a double major in Spanish and International Studies, and of course, a minor in CASC. Before launching her career in tech, she served as a Fulbright English teaching assistant in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where she then lived for 3 years. She currently lives in Traverse City, Michigan, and her interests include reading, cooking, baking, road tripping, hiking, swimming in lakes, Indian international films, and binge watching good streaming content. Can you say hi, Brinley? Brinley?
Hi.
So great to have you here today. All right, I'm going to stop share. And we're just going to go ahead and launch into the first question. Could you each introduce yourself and just share something about yourself? It could be maybe a favorite book you just read, a hobby that you have, maybe a favorite movie that you've recently seen. And we'll go ahead and start with Brinley.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here and for being here. Fun fact about me, I guess I'll go with one of my favorite books that I just read recently. It's called The Sympathizer. It's a piece of historical fiction, I would say, about a double agent in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. So I highly recommend.
Thank you so much. And welcome. And next we have Margaret.
Hello, everybody. My fun fact is I'm not that fun. I feel like I just watch the same thing over and over. So I love Bob's Burgers. So I'll say that as my TV show.
I love Bob's Burgers too. So good. Thanks, Margaret. And next we have Emily Hill. You can say a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. Really happy to be sharing space with you all this evening. I am a therapist, consultant, and educator. I actually work with Liz at their practice, Amplify Colectivo in Ann Arbor, so it's really great to be here. Really excited. One of my favorite all-time books, which I recommend to everyone, especially those in CASC to read, is Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. Really great stuff about like collective organizing and just like, you know, community and the sort of things that we're owing to each other. So recommend that.
Wonderful. Thanks. I love that book. Thanks, Emily. And Whitney?
Hi, everyone. I'm Whitney. And the first thing that popped in my head, honestly, that I'm very into right now is Love is Blind. Only like high art TV shows, obviously. Yeah, but it's honestly, I just love to watch the strange human interactions.
Great, that's awesome. And Eliza?
Hi, everyone. I'm trying to think of something interesting, but I recently, as mentioned, moved to Seattle. So I've been doing a lot more exploring outside lately. But content-wise, I think I just read Normal People, which I thought was really good. And I've been watching a lot of Euphoria, and Stick It is my favorite movie if you haven't seen it. So that's what I've been watching.
Ooh, I love a good recommendation. I have not seen that, so I'm pretty excited. Would it be helpful for those that are able for the students to turn on their cameras just so you can kind of see who you're talking to? Would that be helpful? If folks are comfortable, please go ahead and turn your video on. It's just kind of nice to see who the audience is and who the CASCers are right now. If you're not able or not comfortable right now, that's also fine. So the next question I have for you, and I just want to say too, so I have a couple of questions that we're going to post to the panelists, but then we'll open it up to the students. You can save your question to the end or just kind of shoot it in the chat. I'll do my best to moderate to make sure that if you don't want to ask it in person, I'm happy to read them at the end as well. All right. So what were some of your main takeaways from CASC? What do you feel like you gained from being part of CASC that you took with you onto your life's journey? And you can go in any order. I just want to make sure all of you answer.
I can start. Oh, okay.
You can go.
I was in CASC, but I was also in the RC. And so I feel like what was RC for me and what was CASC is kind of blurry. Because in my bio, I did like PCAP, but that felt more CASC-y than RC. But I didn't finish RC, so I won't rep them too much. But I think what I gained in that aspect is I was pushed to do like internships or community service related classes that I really enjoyed. And I think those classes really set up a good foundation for me to go to grad school. Like, I put in my resume, I worked at X, Y, and Z. They don't need to know if I got paid or not to do the work. They just need to know I did the work. And also when I did more community engaged things later, I could take, those lessons I learned from my internship experiences and, the classes that we took. So I already had the language that they were speaking versus the students who were just now getting into community engaged things. So I think that was a very valuable experience. And I still talk to the people from my internship, letter rec writers or, just friends. So those are my highlights from undergrad in general, actually.
I can add to that. I think I was going to say a similar kind of story where CASC, one of the classes I took, had me like interning and working at Planned Parenthood. And now, however many years later, I am working full-time in women's health and have a lot more connections and experience. So it was a really nice connection early on to like figure out what I wanted to do. But I think even more than that, there was a lot of individual classes and professors that were super influential. But I think just getting to know all of the other CASC students and kind of getting to know everyone else's passions has been instrumental in just connections down the line and just getting to see what people are interested in. And the CASC Capstone course, I think, just really helped me reflect on like my journey so far, and then going into like the post-grad world, figuring out, well, what do I want to do with this? Like, what are the opportunities out there? So I think that was very helpful for me.
Yeah, I really appreciate what both have said so far. I think for me, one of my biggest takeaways from CASC is that it put a framework around a lot of feelings that I was having. So I always knew that I wanted to help people. I knew that I didn't like unnecessary suffering in the world, and I didn't know how to grapple with that until I found CASC and learned about all of the different ways that people are fighting for justice around the world, particularly Kelly Maxwell's course. I hope she's still giving it. I don't know, but I just learned about all the different ways there are to go about, realizing social justice. I think the other kind of biggest takeaway that I learned or that I took away from CASC was a quote that I heard once during a symposium at Michigan. And it said, social justice work is like building a cathedral, and that it takes hundreds of years to build. And we're never going to see the finished product. But what we're doing right now is just building or drawing the blueprints to that cathedral. And that's stuck with me forever.
I think similar to Brinley's answer, CASC really just gave me like a framework. So regardless of whether you're going to actually go into a field that's like advocacy or community organizing or something where you are working on a more macro scale, like I work as a therapist, it's one-on-one, it's as micro as you can get, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that the frameworks of like macro organizing or community action are useless to me. It gave me a really great framework to figure out how to translate some of the principles and concepts, like the social justice principles that you learn about in CASC, give me a good idea of like, how does this look in different fields? And if you want to go into a field that we don't sort of traditionally think, these principles sort of apply to, or are a big part of them, like there's definitely ways that you can translate it in the field. And so it just sort of pushed me to sort of critically think about like, what does this look like in a therapy room one-on-one? Because I knew I wanted to be a therapist at that time when I was completing CASC. And so I think like, definitely I want to echo like the things about meeting people and building community that the other panelists have said, but I think really like the framework for me was the biggest takeaway.
For me, I feel like I learned a lot about myself, which is definitely like a very a constant journey. But I like grew up in a very homogenous, small, like white working class town. And I feel like I just like didn't realize how much I didn't know. And then I was starting to be able to like challenge my like white savior complex tendencies and realizing literally what intersectionality was. Like that was something that I had never heard of. I had no understanding. And so I feel like I learned a lot, and I really continued like through my master's program. It's just never ending. And I feel like the one thing I think of as well is like, you don't know what you don't know. And so it's like very important to like stay humble and to always be open to like new learning opportunities about yourself, about people around you. Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for your thoughtful answers. The next question I have is just, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and maybe what led you to that passion? And anyone can start.
I'll start on this one. So I am a recruiter, and I work in tech, which can be a pretty icky thing, admittedly. And I think what led me here was, at first, I needed to find employment after being an English teaching assistant in Argentina. And I just kind of naturally gravitated towards business, which is never something I thought that I would do. And I think the way that CASC has informed my career is that if we're forced to live under capitalism, and if I am finding myself to work for a business, I want it to be one that has a positive social impact. So I used to work for a company that tried to help other companies improve upon their diversity and inclusion, recruiting and hiring practices. And then most recently, I've been working for an event tech company that tries to bring people closer and make events more accessible. So that's what I've been doing. And I think similarly to Emily, I work very much on like a one-to-one scale. I'm helping the business find people to hire, but also helping people find employment at these companies. And so that's been just really lovely and a really great opportunity to help people find better opportunities for themselves under the system that we live in.
I can go. So as I said in my bio, I recently quit my job. After grad school, I moved to Philadelphia to teach second grade. And this was sort of what I had been like dreaming of doing for a while. I was so excited about it. But COVID plus like being in a new place with not much of a support network, and then basically having to face the reality that like I was essentially misled by like the school leadership when I was hired for the position. Like they just talked a great game. And then like when I showed up and like was there, I just had absolutely no support. And I didn't feel comfortable continuing in the way that they wanted me to teach. It just did not align with my values at all. And I had a lot of guilt in leaving, feeling like I was, abandoning my kids, but I knew that I wasn't in a good place. I had like stopped eating out, like I couldn't eat at work, and it was just really poor for my health. So I quit my job, came home for a weekend to Michigan, and then just like never left. And now I'm a nanny for a 6-month-old baby, which is definitely better stress-wise. My biggest complaint is that it's like, a little bit understimulating. So I am looking forward to going back into early childhood education, and I want to be like more on like the family partnership side, community partnership side, making sure that like families have resources, and we're bringing in like community partners to make it like a more whole child approach to education, which is actually what I thought I wanted to do when I went to grad school. Then I thought I wanted to be a teacher. It's never ending.
Okay, I can go. So I, similar to Brinley, kind of found myself in the business space. So I was a business major at Michigan. So originally I went straight into a very business field, consulting. And when I went there, they kind of sold me, similar to Whitney, on the fact that I was going to be doing a lot of like social impact work. And they're like, we have all these really cool projects that they do have going on, but is maybe harder to get onto when you just join and just come from undergrad. So it took me a while there to get my bearings and be like, okay, I'm working in a fully business realm. Like there is not social impact intersecting my work. And finally, after like a year, I found all of the social impact projects and was doing the work that I wanted to be doing, but still grappling with the fact that it was in a very business mindset, and just kind of everyone around me was much more maybe focused on the business side of things. So that is when I recently left and decided to join Gates Ventures, which is it's not quite a branch of Gates Foundation, but it does more of the thinking and the strategy for Bill's work. So I'm running women's health in our Exemplars in Global Health program. It's been 8 months now, so it feels like I just started, but it's been a fun journey because they had no women's health program before this. So have been exploring this and finding a different angle of the intersection between business and social impact. So it's been a very different approach than my last job, but looking for just different ways that I can find where my skill set merges in those two realms. And I think I'm clearly still figuring that out. But I think starting way back in CASC at Planned Parenthood, I knew the women's health space would be somewhere I'm continuing to explore. So I'm excited.
I can go next. I have several hats. I'm sure a lot of people have several hats too, though, that they didn't talk about, but I'm gonna talk about mine. I own a small business that I started last year doing freelance artwork. Hit me up, madebymargaret.com. The second thing I do is I'm a PhD student, which means several jobs, but not the pay of several jobs. So I teach Psych 101 to incarcerated individuals through like an online program. I do my own research. You're a lab manager, you mentor students, you're doing a lot. And then the third thing that I do is I'm an intern for Cities United, which is a national based organization. It's based in Kentucky, but they do stuff across the nation, trying to reduce gun violence and homicide for Black men, and create safe, healthy, and hopeful communities for the Black men and their families. Through there, they have this fellowship program, which if you're interested in community violence work, and if you're Black, you should apply. They take fellows around the country. They teach them, the root cause of violence, which is, poverty and racism in America. And it's a really great opportunity, and I love it there. I'm in developmental psych, but I haven't talked to kids often. So this internship was a really good way for me to connect with some young people, and I really enjoy it. So those are the three main things that I have going on right now.
Okay, so I also have a few different hats that sort of I wear in my life and my work. So first and foremost, I think I would identify as like a therapist first. I got there because I really truly believe in the power of letting people tell their stories in the way that makes the most sense for them and letting them create the meaning of their life that makes the most sense to them. I grew up as like a queer person of color, having narratives about me given to me by other like white people who like didn't really get it. And so that was really upsetting to me. So I knew I wanted to create spaces for people where they could come and sort of work out what they needed to work out in a way that they felt seen and honored and just really safe. So I do that. That takes up a lot of my time. I'm also a consultant and an educator, and that's kind of a newer venture for me. I have also been a clinical supervisor, which in the therapy world just means I help like newer stage therapists who are just starting out and making sure that they are learning and growing. And the sort of consulting education is new because I've started to step into a role where I want to show other therapists and other sort of therapy organizations like, this is what this looks like to, you know, be able to, you know, have these decolonization principles in your work. Like, you know, we can't see other therapists work with clients because of confidentiality, but, you know, this is what it looks like to build a practice founded on this principle. This is what it's like to shatter the notions of this, like, white male dominated, like historically harmful mental health field. And this is what this can look like sort of like really sustainably and also very appropriately and responsibly. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's about it.
Great. I appreciate hearing all of that. That's really helpful. Something that made me think about, you talked about all of you talked about successes and some of the things that are exciting and also some of the challenges. I wonder if you could dig a little bit deeper into the challenges around, like, what did you find most difficult as you moved from undergrad into a job or internship or graduate school or whatever the next phase of your journey was? Yeah, I kind of have a follow-up, but I think we'll go with that. So anything, you know, whatever you found difficult as you moved from undergrad into the next phase of your journey.
Some of the stuff that was difficult for me was managing everything. Like when I applied to PhD programs, I was in undergrad. And like, as I said, I had many hats. I had a lot of hats then. It's a me problem, you know, nobody told me to pick up the hats. But trying to manage everything at the same time is difficult. And also, my biggest problem now is I love my advisor to pieces, but she's not a good manager. She's a good human, but she's like last minute. And, you know, people talk about managing up, and some people are manageable and some people just are stuck in their ways. So navigating that, and also like, which might go into my advice, but just following your heart. There's a lot of things that I want to do and that I've been discouraged to not do because of X, Y, and Z, but I still apply anyway because that's just how I am. And those opportunities are like the best ones that I've had, the most rewarding. And so it's been a challenge to know what I want and also take advice and knowing, like, you know, where the advice is coming from and if I should take it or not, has been difficult for me to figure out.
Okay, I mentioned some of my challenges, but I'll reiterate and expand on them. But I think the main one is, I guess I graduated in 2019, so it's been only a few years out, 3.5, 4 years. And I still just don't know what I want to do. And I don't feel like I have like access to all of the different opportunities and kind of knowledge around like what career paths and just kind of life paths there are out there that are in this space. And I think it's been much more difficult for me to wrap my head around that compared to other friends who are maybe in like other business roles that are very much like a mainstream path that other people go through and kind of have the same growth trajectory or where they're going. And I think my path now has diverged from theirs. And I'm grappling with where does that leave me, or like, where do I go? So I think main challenge is finding the roles and other people in this space, and like continuing to work in this space. So right now I've been, prior to this role, doing a lot of like reaching out on LinkedIn and just finding careers that sound exciting and impactful to me. And that has been a challenge of itself, but still exciting to like meet a ton of new people in these areas. So that would be the main one.
I have a bit of a different answer. My answer is the thing that was most challenging for me was racism and misogyny, and the intersection of those two things as I was trying to sort of build a sustainable career for myself. So obviously you can see how I look. I'm like a feminine presenting Asian person. I think there's a lot of expectations for what someone who looks like me, like what they're going to do in workplaces and how they're going to behave and present. Listen, I don't know if any other folks of color here can relate. Like I am on it. Like I am like on it in my work. Like I like leave no like room for anyone to criticize me. I'm on my stuff because I know that I've got to be 1,000 times more perfect than the white man standing next to me. You know, like I'm on it and have been on it. And that's obviously like come with a lot of anxiety and other like not great things, but like I am on it. I leave no room for anyone to sort of like question the merit of my work. Yet still I encountered, you know, a few different workplaces that I worked in earlier on in my career. I encountered a lot of racism and misogyny, and a lot, especially like when the pandemic started, I was actually working not in a private sector, not for myself. And I encountered just a ton of racism. And it was really hard because I would say all the time, like you can't question me on my clinical skills. Like I am great at what I do. Like have you heard any complaints from any patients or any clients? Like, no, like really great at what I do. But yet still, you know, I think value gets called into question a lot, and it is kind of maddening and it was maddening for me to experience, like, I know I'm not like doing poorly in my roles. Like, I know this is sort of like, I'm on it and truly doing like a really wonderful job. And so just feeling really disheartened of like, you know, we come in with this CASC energy of like, yeah, I'm going to change the world. I'm like going to change these organizations that I work for. And then you just get hit with such like a brick wall sometimes against you that you're like, it forces you to, I think, take stock and like evaluate and question yourself. Like, what am I pouring out here? And am I pouring out too much? And should I stop? And should I, you know, maybe put what I want on hold for, you know, a different reason? So I really think like, you know, I can't sort of overestimate to people like, this is a real thing. It's not in your head. Like if you feel like you're being treated in a certain way, like it's really real. And it's a really big challenge that I think a lot of people sort of like know exists, but they don't sort of bring it into the forefront of their experience a lot. So I'm always encouraging, like, there's no reason not to believe people when they say these are dynamics that they are encountering as they're moving from university into their workplaces.
So I feel like when I talked about what I was doing, it was kind of already on the challenge side. So I'd like to add a little bit of a positive spin on it, and just to say that finding out what you don't like and what doesn't work for you is also extremely valuable information, and it's gonna take a lot of that. Like I absolutely hated my first practicum when I was in grad school. Like I just went through so many iterations of like trying to figure it out. I'm still absolutely trying to figure it out. But I really want to echo like what Margaret said about like following your heart, especially I think with my like teaching career. I feel like I took a big swing and I did exactly what I wanted to do despite like the pandemic and the naysayers, and it didn't work out, but that's okay because I'm still here, still going, and we'll try something else.
That's beautiful. And I really appreciate how you all took that kind of from personal level to very overarching, looking at racism and misogyny. So kind of covering a lot of topics when we're thinking about what are challenges and what comes into that. And I also want to echo that comment about advisors. When I went, the difference between my master's and my PhD was just so vast that a lot of it had to do with the advisor. When I did my master's at U of M, I was like, oh, just, assign me an advisor. And I regret that. And so when I went to do my PhD, I mean, I had like some idea of math, but I also let the school influence a lot of what kind of work I was going to do and who would be the most appropriate advisor, even though I wanted someone else, or like, we really think this is a better match. And so I let people be more of be more in my ear than I wish. And then when I did my PhD, I went to MSU specifically because of Kyle Powell's White. Like, I wanted to work specifically with somebody, and that made a really big difference. Thanks for sharing that, Margaret. So just like, thinking about grad school, internships, jobs, from the personal to the big issues, I just think that was a really wonderful answer. I have one more question before we open it up. There's a question that's coming into the chat. So if you think of any questions, students, if you could just write them down or put them in the chat to make sure we get to them. So the next question is, what advice do you have for current CASCers?
I can start here. Honestly, I think that my biggest piece of advice is to take care of yourselves. I think what you probably heard from everyone else that was just speaking, it's not easy, like nothing is easy. And I think I really empathize with Emily, what you said about kind of hitting a brick wall. And I think especially over the past 2 years, it's just really, really hard. There's a lot of despair. And I think when I left CASC and I left U of M, I was very wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I thought that I could do it all, and I thought I could really make a difference. But as we know, we live in a dominating system, as I mentioned before, that really, really, really takes a toll on us. So I think taking care of yourself is important. And I also think that you shouldn't put so much pressure on yourself to try and do everything and try and enact justice. Because I hate to break it to you, but it's not possible with just one person. So I think, living as best as we can, living our values as best as we can under a patriarchal capitalistic system is hard. So that's just my advice. Go easy on yourself, stay true to yourself, and take care of yourself.
So Brinley stole mine, so I'm just gonna tack some things on. I hated when I was in CASC and they talked about self-care because it's so hard to do that when you're in college. And they did it again in grad school. And I was like, this is honestly bullshit because I'm so busy. I don't know how you expect me to take care of myself. But it has to be a huge priority. Someone once said to me, I don't think this was their original words. I'm sure it's from someone more well-known, but like, don't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. I tell myself that literally all the time. And it really is like, it can't be a complete like self-sacrificial endeavor. You have to take care of yourself at the same time. Like, you're not going to do good things for people if like you're suffering. It's just not sustainable. And so a couple of like concrete ways, I think it's super, super important. And this is something like I didn't do, and I would have been interested in their answer, but like in a job, I think it's super important, like in an interview, is to ask them like the concrete ways they plan to support you, and not just like let them pay lip service, but really like ask like, what are the ways that like management like will be there for like things like that, because I just think it's so often like so lacking. And then the other thing is I love the book Trauma Stewardship. If you haven't read it, I think it's a really it's a really comprehensive, I think, like book. It's easy to read, and it really like helped me shed some of like the pressure that I put on myself and some of like the guilt that I would feel for not doing everything all the time. Because yeah, if you're burnt out, which again, we talk about burnout all the time and it's very real. Yeah.
The advice I would give, especially if you're gonna move or start, a fresh start somewhere else, is to find your community and quickly. I like to stay in my house, and so finding good community. I mean, I have some online, but sometimes you got to push yourself to take a class or do X, Y, and Z to actually meet people. And it's so important. I study community, so maybe I'm a little biased in that, but everybody shook their head yes. So I will say that other people agree. And then the other thing is to not be afraid to fail. We're all young. Nobody's going to remember that program you made that nobody showed up to in 20 years. Nobody's going to remember, you not doing something that you wanted to do and it didn't work out. They're going to remember at that point who you are now and you got to that point because you did fail and you learned from your mistakes and, you got better. So take risk while you're young. And you can take a risk when you're older too, but especially while you're young would be my advice, which is cliche advice, but I mean, it's real.
I very much agree with both points. For the first point on finding your community, I think I didn't quite realize that moving from Detroit to Chicago and then Chicago out to Seattle, where I had never been out west or anywhere. And I think there is a strong Michigan community and kind of a lot of different communities to get involved in, but very important to find your people. And the other point of advice, I think, is just to really get to know everyone in the CASC major or minor, everyone on this call. I think just the community in itself of CASC and just people who have very similar passion areas and kind of drive in this space is just really helpful and reassuring and just great people. So I would definitely take the time while you have this space with amazing people to get to know them.
I'll just echo that sentiment that community is very important. It's literally the first word of the name of the minor. So yes, find your community, but also ask them for help, which is not something that I hear about a lot. Like I know we all have hangups about asking for help. It's really hard. It's really hard when we're considerate of other people and their energy levels and what they've got going on for them. I will just throw this out there that so I work at a group practice with Liz a few times over the course of the pandemic. I've literally emailed out to everyone and been like, hey, everyone, I'm not doing okay. Can someone help me? Can someone meet up with me? Does anyone want to jump on a call? Does anyone want to go to a park and just hang out? I was floored with the responses that I received, just the nicest, warmest, kindest, oh my gosh, Emily, yes, I'm struggling too. And I would love to do that with you. People really care. It's sometimes really hard for people to, make the first move out to reach out because we are so considerate of other people's time and energy that we don't want to add something onto their plate. But it just sort of doesn't work if everyone takes that point of view, because then no one's reaching out and then we're not really tapping in and harnessing the power of community. I know it feels very, very hard to sort of reach out and be the first one to do it. But that's sort of community is there for you in great times, but also, in the times when things are not so great.
Amazing advice. I really just appreciate everything that you all have shared. I also feel like I've heard through this conversation just a reiteration of so many good practices of community organizing, from having flexibility and being very heart-driven, holding humility, being flexible and open, and not being afraid to fail. I mean, these are just such important things to take with you, whether it's community organizing or into any piece of your passion. We have a question from one of the students. I'm going to go ahead and read it. It says this to Eliza, but I feel like this is applicable to all of you, like thinking about how CASC fits into your work. But in business, was it really difficult to integrate CASC into a more non-CASC related major like psychology or sociology? Were people not as receptive to social justice work? And anyone else with this experience too?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. And I think that's definitely the case. I think it's kind of something I took for granted that this community was like a little bubble almost of people who are very passionate, open to learning about this topic, like care about others. And then I think you go into any realm, but especially the business realm. And I think there's just a lot less interest and concern for these areas. So like me trying to get my foot in the door and kind of create space for some CASC related areas, whether it's within the company or with the work we're doing, was definitely a challenge, at least for the first year. But I think everyone, including, we had a staffing manager, and they would all be like, no, it's really not worth it to try and keep getting on like studies that are focused on like areas that you really care about. You're gonna burn out trying to get on this kind of work. Like it's a lot of effort, just like do what everyone else does and do these kind of projects on like oil and I don't even know, things that I wasn't interested in. And it took a lot of effort for me to say, no, I'm not gonna kind of change what I want to do, even though it would have been way easier. And so I think that part, it takes a while to figure out how to integrate it in. But I think if you're like persistent about it, and you will find other people who are passionate about it, like no matter what area you go into or what field you're studying. So I would say definitely stick with it, but it's definitely not maybe the most receptive as I thought it would be after coming out of Michigan and the CASC community. But I'll open it up to others who also have different takes.
Does anyone, oh, Margaret, you want to go ahead?
Just real quick, I found that you think psychology would, I'm not saying psychology doesn't, but I'm in a very traditional program, and doing participatory work, like working with communities, takes a long time because you have to like develop a relationship with people. And that work is not as valued or not as, like, they always ask me why when I could just do something else more quickly. Some people just want to do science for science, and there's people like me who want to do science for change. And so it's important for me to do that work. And so it's extra work. Like I have to do the work that they want me to do and the work that I'm passionate about at the same time. Because I can't not, publish or do X, Y, and Z just because what I want to do takes a long time. And so just figuring out if I really wanted to do it was important. Like am I married to doing community action work, or do I just want to do a PhD and just do, I don't know what other people do, but either way is fine, just figuring out what you really want to do and sticking with it and finding ways, to figure it out. And that spaces that you think might be receptive of it may not be, depending on the program. Like if I was in a more applied program or a community psych program, I imagine my work would be more well received. But because I'm in a more traditional program, people always ask questions, which might go back to the racism and misogyny that Emily mentioned. Like, why are you studying Black people? Like nobody asks white people why they study white people. So just like little things like that always come up in my work.
Did any of the other panelists want to answer that? Or did you find it pretty easy to kind of incorporate?
I was pretty shocked so I did a joint master's program at WashU where I did an MSW and master's in elementary education. And I was quite shocked at like this the differences in ideologies and approaches between the two programs. And the school didn't really do a great job of like trying to marry the two. So it was a lot of like taking kind of like ways of thinking and critiquing things that I learned through social work and kind of applying it to the School of Education, because it was very traditional. And I mean, I had an incident basically with a professor who truly, like, I was trying to explain like intersectionality to her. And like, this was a PhD tenured professor at WashU and was totally just like gaslighting me. And it was ridiculous. So I think like you'd be surprised, like even if you think you're kind of going into a field where you won't encounter these things, you probably still will. So I think it's really important to just like speak up when something's not right and just really stick with your convictions, because somebody's got to do it, and a lot of people won't. So, and it's hard, but I hope that's not the most uplifting, but it's true.
Great. Brinley or Emily, did you want to add anything to that? Okay. Just want to open it up to anyone else that has questions or comments. This is your time to spend a moment with an alum.
I have a question. So like while you guys were answering some of the other questions, you kind of spoke to this experience of realizing that not everyone in the world is like as dedicated to social change and like this really progressive perspective as we do like in like U of M CASC Minor. And so I was wondering like how did you adjust to this change, and how have you like continued, like how did you decide to like continue to pursue like these elements of social change in your work?
Thanks, Diane, for your question. I think for me, it's something that I can't extrapolate from my person. So, if I found myself in a position, which I have in the past, of being like, experiencing misogyny, or just being in an interaction where I don't, it's just not right what's going on. I think speaking up, even though it's hard, but also just getting myself out of there. I think we all have to be an ally, but we all also, to Whitney's point, can't set ourselves on fire to keep everyone else warm. So I think it's just really important for you to keep in touch with yourself and with your values and iterate upon how you can better live those values in your day-to-day, based upon just your reality and, again, the system that we live in. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but that's kind of how I think about it.
For me, back to the community piece, once I found the community, I asked a lot of questions. And so I didn't want to enter a space not informed. And so my now friends would tell me, like, don't work with that person. This is what they did to me. Or if you do work with them, do X, Y, and Z. And so that was how I navigated it, by talking to people who had already had to go through the space that I was going through. And then what was the second part of your question? I don't remember what else I was going to say, but that was how I navigated the field.
Yeah, I think you do what you can. For me, it didn't really feel like it was a choice. Like, I don't want to be working around people who believe that like people of color like shouldn't have rights, or like queer people shouldn't be able to exist. Like that's not something that I want for my own wellness, and that's not something that I want for like anyone else's wellness either, right? Didn't necessarily feel like a choice. And I think you do what you can. I often tell people, you don't need to make this like as cool and like romanticized as we think these grand gestures of like standing up to people in meetings and like calling them out on their racism or, their homophobia. Is like as romanticized as those notions are, like in practice, you face really stiff opposition to that. Especially, I used to work in a setting with a really strict vertical hierarchy. In which my profession, social work, was at the bottom, right? So like it was really hard for me, even though I sort of knew all of the sort of like intellectual arguments behind it and, felt that I could articulate them really well. Like that was just not a position I was willing to put myself in for my own wellness. So that wasn't going to be what I was going to do. But I think talking, figuring out sort of like Margaret was talking about, like figure out the people who are like cool, right? Figure out the people who are receptive, who are like, who you can go to after a meeting and be like, hey, that was really messed up. Like, can we talk about it? The people who are receptive, like one person, we don't sort of visualize as being social change. They're just one person. But we do move the needle with one person. And I'm biased because I'm a therapist and I really believe that, but like we do move the needle with one person. And then that one person goes and moves the needle with another one person. And that's sort of the pattern of dominoes that fall. So really, I think like be wise, pick and choose your battles, like there might be another person better suited to do the thing where they stand up in the meeting and like call everyone out on the bad things that are happening. But if you're the person that just like pulls someone aside and it's just like, hey, like I heard that messed up thing that someone said to you, and I just want you to know that I'm here for you if you need to process that or talk about it. Like for me, that's also pretty cool and pretty significant.
Did anyone else from the panel want to answer that? Or you feel like that's well covered? Any other questions from folks? The one thing that I heard a little bit of a theme is how hard it is to do self-care. So one last thing I kind of wanted to ask was, what do you do now? Or, Whitney, you said it was impossible to do so, or it felt impossible when you're in school. Like if you could go back in time, would you do something different while you were in school? Like, and like, what is that? So either what does it look like now, or if you could go back and shift some of the ways in which you operated, like what would each of you do?
I feel like for me, it doesn't have as much to do with self-care as it does with just, I wish that I would have taken advantage of my time at Michigan by doing more things that I was interested in, period. Like, I feel like I have so many passions, interests now that have to do with social justice and community and all of that. And being at a place like Michigan, I just wish I would have realized that earlier. And I wish I would have gotten involved in more communities that were involved and working on things like that. So sorry to deviate your question a little bit there, but that's what I would have done differently with my time, I think.
What I wish I would do differently, because I still don't do it, is when I travel or like take a vacation to actually do it, I spent like a week in Las Vegas. My dad lives there now. He's from Michigan though. And it was supposed to be my vacation. I spent the whole time on my laptop trying to write a master's thesis that ended up getting trashed anyway. Like it wasn't worth it. And so when you take breaks, really take breaks, unplug, don't think about work, and, just indulge in yourself and not worry about other people as much as you can, of course. But that would be the thing I wish I would do still.
I wish that I got a therapist sooner and did the work to make sure that it was like someone that was a really good fit. I had many bad experiences growing up with therapy, and I didn't have a good experience with therapy until I was like in my second year of my MSW program. Like had gone through like the training to like be a therapist and was still like, not sure if it's for me. And it was just because like I just had such bad experiences. But like if you have the access to it, if it's something you can have, I think that we just need it. We just need it. And thank you to Emily for doing it, because I could never.
Whitney, that's so kind of you to say that. I'm sure you definitely could, so don't underestimate yourself there. If I could do anything differently, I would definitely care way less about my grades in undergraduate. I was someone who, knew they were going to go to grad school, so grades are like kind of important to get into graduate school. But also, like, if I could go back in time, I would snap myself out of all those moments where I was like, no, I must get an A on this one paper that's only worth 15% of my grade in one class that I'm going to take out of the like 20 for my major or something, like seems like pretty silly to me now, but I know like in the moment, it means a lot. Like it feels very significant. It feels, very, very important to invest your time in making sure you get that A. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it doesn't matter. I think that's really condescending. It absolutely does matter if you feel that it matters. But also maybe just balance that with a little bit of self-care. And by self-care, I mean like stop looking at Canvas or stop looking at, your assignments or your lectures, even for like an hour, and really, really take really good, gentle, tender care of yourself. I echo the sentiment of Margaret said about like totally unplugging. I recently took a whole month off work and it was really great and it was really needed. And I was very fearful about it because for several reasons, but I did it and I did not look at my email the whole time. I had a lot of anxiety coming back to it, knowing that I was going to be full of just emails, but it was great to feel like I was totally unfettered to something, even though my work does mean a lot to me and I really do love it. Being able to sort of take a step back and be like, listen, like nothing bad is going to happen if I just don't look at this for a while, if I'm completely indulgent in taking care of myself. And by that, I mean like spending time with people I love, eating the foods that I love, doing the things I love, walking outside with no intention of going anywhere specific, just being outside in nature and enjoying the cold Michigan winters, really just cool stuff like that. I think it's just really important. It doesn't have to look a certain way for you. It can literally be however you want it to be, whatever feels nourishing and meaningful to you.
And I think everyone's point was really good and would reiterate all of those. I think the only additional one I would add is I think getting more comfortable being alone. I think at Michigan, you're always like, there's always like groups of people doing similar things and you kind of just like go with the flow of like doing what people are doing. So I guess this is similar to Brinley's point of like doing what you love more, but like just being like, oh, I love pottery. So I'm going to go seek out and find time to do pottery by myself. And just, doing more of what you do love. So that would be it.
I do have one last question. I know we're coming up on time here. But in our class, we've been talking a lot about our values and how our values are connected to our social identities and also how we live into those values. So I want to throw out there, what is a value that you have that is connected to your identity? And how have you lived into that value? So for example, one of the things I've shared with my students is that one of the things I value is a strong work ethic. And that comes from my identity of growing up in a low-income family and seeing how hard my mother worked and worked with joy. I don't know how she found joy in it, but she did. But she really instilled in me this work ethic. So wanting to put that out there to you all.
This has not been something I've thought of before, but I'll just add my thoughts. I think defiance or like disagreeability would be something that I would say like I've become much more comfortable and like stand with now, whereas I think growing up just wasn't a thing for me to be disagreeable, or like you kind of just like have to be go with like how society is or how things are already. So think I've come more comfortable and value that a lot more.
Totally. And I think what I was going to say, and I love this question because it really challenges me to reflect on my values. But I think the constant journey of knowing myself and checking in on myself, because as a woman, everyone else around me tells me how I should be feeling and what I should be doing. And and so I think that's been a journey for me to stay true to myself, to listen to my body, and honor that, even if it's not what other people around me want from me.
I really value kindness, and I mean this in like the least toxic positivity way. So I think it's really important to be, especially in my profession, really kind to people. And you might be thinking to yourself, Emily, of course, you're a therapist. They're so nice to people. But it's really a vulnerable time for people when they're seeking our care and they're reaching out, and like the things that Whitney talked about where they experience not great times with therapists, like unfortunately we know that that's a reality in the field. So being really kind to people, like things that seem second nature to me are not second nature to another person. So being really patient and kind and showing them like, I'm literally here to be fascinated by how amazing that your story is. And I'm here also to be really patient and really kind with you in the moments where like, we're not quite sure, what you're crafting next for your story. And to be, as kind as I can to people. I think it's also because I grew up, my parents were like very mean and very rude to people. And I was like so embarrassed by that whenever that would happen in front of me. So I just really value like, there's a way I think to be firm with people, but also to be really kind with individual people. And in contrast to that, being very like ruthless with systems, so criticizing and taking down systems, but not implicating the individuals within them because they are a product of their systems around them, right? So being kind with the individual, being absolutely ruthless with the systems around us.
I think the value that I've reflected on most in grad school, which isn't one that like write on my applications or anything, is family. I knew before family meant a lot to me, but this was my first time actually moving away from them. I did study abroad, but that was, 6 weeks. I'm in North Carolina. I've never driven more than 30 minutes on a highway. I have now this past weekend, I did 5 hours. But, if this panel was a week before. And so like when things happen at home, I can't just get there easily. I talk to my mom every day. Like family is why I do the research I do. And it's been very difficult, especially I guess with the pandemic, but in general, even before the pandemic started, to be so far away from family and not have people who know me outside of being a grad student, around me. And so that's one of the values that drives my work and has been a struggle for me lately.
One that I'm thinking of that I've really been reflecting on lately is forgiveness. That people around us deserve forgiveness. We deserve to forgive ourselves. And that really just comes from believing in the inherent potential and goodness of people. And the fact that, just as Emily said, like people are shaped by their environments, but we have the potential to be kind, to love each other, and all of that. Again, it kind of sounds cliche, but I do really think that given the opportunity to be accountable, like forgiveness is so important. And I think it can make us feel so much more whole to forgive and to be forgiven.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing those values. I think it just fits so well to what we're talking about with the capstone as all these students are wrapping up their CASC time. Liz, did you have any announcements for your class before we give gratitude to our panelists?
Yeah, so just for my class, we will pop on Zoom for our class at 6:15, and then just pop on, and then we'll take a break and come back. So see you all on Zoom at 6:15.
Great, thanks, Liz. Just a quick announcement for my class. I'm going to post a reflection on Canvas so that you can post your reflection after this panel there. And I would just ask right now if everyone could take themselves off mute and give your love and gratitude for all of our panelists that have taken time out of their amazing lives to spend time with all of us and build community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all so much for being here. I just appreciate it so much. And I will be in touch with each of the panelists in the next day or two. So thank you very, very much. This was wonderful.